Hello, and welcome to Replay Value. Earlier this season, I compared Hanebado and Haikyuu's opening episodes to talk about how the narrative structures showed what each was focused on and how that would ripple throughout the season. Since then, we've had some time to see how that setup has played out in Hanebado, and to be really frank, it hasn't been great. I still think the show is good. The animation, music, and voice acting are all there, but the show is a far cry from what my hopes were after the first episode earlier this season. And the main reason for that fundamentally comes back to a term that gets thrown around a lot when people are complaining about things without too much thought behind it: pacing. So just in case it isn't clear what pacing is because people have abstracted the idea too much, it's the rate at which a story is told. It's not a word count, runtime, or episode total. It's the speed at which the narrative itself is conveyed. For comparison's sake, consider how a more standard abridged series conveys the same general story beats, but as a comedy instead of a drama, the pace is tightened to keep a lighthearted vibe and the jokes flowing, instead of going for dramatic tension, which would require elongation. I find that there's a trend for single core adaptations of non-episodic narratives to struggle with their pacing, and Hanebado continues that trend, attempting to do too much with the limited time at its disposal. As an aside, this is why I think slice of life shows do really well as anime adaptations, since they're only limited by the number of sketches they can tell in 22 minutes times the number of episodes. And so Hanebado's issue is that in its attempt to introduce and develop so many characters, whom I assume get their proper due in the manga, the pacing for the character development and narrative feels far too rapid, and glossed over for the sake of the next character development and or story beat. Let's chat about why that matters, and I promise to keep Haikyuu comparisons to a minimum. The most glaring issue when it comes to pacing is honestly with the villain characters. No one, literally no one, should ever be rooting for Pink Hair Girl. Episode 3 is designed to make her 100% irredeemable. She comes off as a straight up bad person with not a single redeeming characteristic in this adaptation, and it's actually insane to me that we spend any amount of time on her backstory or have scenes that are designed to make us emotionally resonate with her later in the show. It's a cheap ploy that's primarily designed to make Hanasaki seem like the bad guy, which is completely unreasonable in regard to how Pink Hair treated her. And secondly, to try and make the audience have both the emotional response to winning and losing, since theoretically we'd have engagement on both sides. But the reality is that the show does not have time to turn Pink Hair into someone we can root for when we've seen her cruelty not only before this, but also earlier in the very episode in which they're trying to make this U-turn. And that's the main issue, frankly. Hanebado wants Pink Girl to still be a bad person, but that Hanasaki's current state has somehow gone beyond that to the point where in comparison, Pink Hair is pitiable. One of the reasons I'm picking on this match in particular is that this archetype is one of my favorites. Natural talent versus practiced skill. And we do get some glimpses of that, but it's impossible for me to root for skill, the side that generally gets the natural inclination of the viewer because hard work, when the embodiment of that side has a scene in that very same episode which makes her seem like a self-centered, crappy teammate. And why bother with this character? There's already a copious amount of evidence that Hanasaki is in her unflinching, uncaring demon mode, and so this match feels more like it's dedicated to her revenge, which makes any action that she takes just desserts against a cold-hearted rival. Pink Hair Girl doesn't even serve as a good foil for Hanasaki. She's just taking up time that could have been used to smooth out Hanasaki's character arc, which, speaking of, Hanasaki's character arc needs so much more time to be properly done. In the span of 5 episodes, she runs the gamut on the developmental spectrum. She starts off in denial and kind of lost, but overall stable. Then she's depressed because she lost to Pink Hair Girl. Then she's full of excitement and her whole viewpoint on badminton has changed, where she now values her team, which brings us to the unflinching, uncaring demon Hanasaki that is still with us in episode 8. Those are 4 huge character shifts over the course of 5 episodes, and we've spent the last 3 basically developing secondary characters and opponents. I completely understand that the tournament is the focal point of a show like this, but frankly it's not worth it if the main character is going through massive personality changes every episode. It doesn't feel deserved, and while I think Hanebado at least is making these changes in response to big emotional events and traumas, it lends a very amateurish vibe to the production, as though the show is saying it doesn't know how to let things settle and to allow characters to establish new status quos. In fairness, I think the first 3 episodes handle themselves perfectly fine for Hanasaki's pacing, mostly because her movement from disillusioned to excited is handled in balance with Aragaki's character development. But episodes 4 and 5 I think needed more time to be fleshed out, or at least more time in the aftermath of the resurrection of the demon. Aragaki's development, by the way, I think is the only one the show has actually handled well, since as deuteragonist it's expected for her primary development to be taken care of as to open up space for the focal point, Hanasaki, to go through her much more complex issues. How the production team realized this necessity and yet decided to give as much screen time to the rivals and secondary cast is beyond me. This last point is both related and unrelated at the same time. Nozomi's coach is everything wrong with Hanebado in a nutshell. A minor character who's a foil for a secondary character gets a big character development that feels completely undeserved and does nothing for the core narrative. He's introduced as a creep, later it becomes apparent that he's just obsessed with winning, yet by the end of episode 8 he suddenly realized the error of his ways and acquired perspective, all because Nozomi stated that she wanted to play her own version of badminton. That's literally the only thing. There's not some personal realization earlier about how Aragaki's coach is letting her find her own way or anything else. Nozomi says some words and suddenly the dude who is down to destroy a girl's knee to further his player's tournament run becomes someone who gives friendly advice to an opposing coach. I don't understand why the change of heart was necessary, especially after they committed so much to making him insufferable. My favorite part of episode 8 is all of his incessant yelling. I'm actually serious. It's super annoying, which puts you in the headspace of the characters on the court. It makes you want Aragaki to destroy Nozomi just so that he'll shut up, and to some degree makes you impressed with Nozomi that she's able to play the game and follow these instructions simultaneously. When Aragaki starts thinking through her plan of attack, his voice becomes background noise because she's tuned him out, and I really appreciate all of that good sound design. What I don't appreciate is that we get the audience shout out of "he's annoying" in case it wasn't blatantly obvious. You'd have to be watching the show muted with subtitles to not get that through the audio, and even then there are plenty of cuts to him interspliced in the action. It's stuff like this which makes me think that there's just no faith in the audience. If you can club them over the head with a bat and still feel the need to say explicitly that they just got treated like a T-ball, then you've decided your audience is brain dead and there's zero expectation for the audience to ever make connections on their own. It's just really sad. There are other really annoying elements that the pacing forces on the audience. Characters like Riko get sidelined, every match feels like the extras match from Haikyuu Season 1 that I talked about, because there just isn't enough time to split the focus with every match ending in one episode, which itself is a result of quick pace and is equally as infuriating given that these tournament matches have actual stakes and archetypal contrasts. The only match in the tournament that I felt actually had tension to it was Riko's. Every other match finished so quickly and had minimal emotional investment. Characters who are introduced as one-dimensional suddenly exhibit new characteristics and backstory for a scene before suddenly heading back into that 1D space. I still think Hanebado is a passable narrative, and all the other elements are there, but depending on how Hanasaki, Connie, and the few other characters who are still relevant to the plot wind up, this show that started off with high hopes could fall into the heap of other irrelevant narratives for the season. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like and comment with your thoughts, subscribe for more videos, and follow me on Twitter for my live analyses and future projects. Link in the description. We'll be back real soon with another video, but until then, thanks for watching.